Welcome to today's teaching from MishnahWalk.com. In this explainer, we address a profound methodological crisis in modern university theology regarding the origins of the divine text. We observe a growing movement in contemporary academic instruction that implicitly suggests the creator of the universe somehow sat at the feet of pagan scribes. This secular framework demands that to understand biblical literature, one must first master the clay tablets of the Akkadians, the legal codes of the Hittites, and the myths of the Babylonians. We will examine precisely why this approach is fundamentally flawed, representing a dangerous category error in theological studies.
Our curriculum will systematically deconstruct the secular ancient Near Eastern academic methodology and restore the traditional framework of the living Mesorah. We will proceed through 5 specific areas of analysis. First, the linguistic fog. Second, the polemic fallacy. Third, marriage not treaty. Fourth, transmission over archaeology. And finally, the throne of truth.
Section 1. The linguistic fog, root versus shadow.
We begin by addressing students of linguistics, specifically analyzing the profound error of utilizing Akkadian texts as a secular dictionary for biblical Hebrew. To comprehend this error, we must establish the precise definition of Loshon HaKodesh, the holy tongue. It is the pre-existing blueprint and essential DNA of all reality. According to the Mishnah and Midrash, Hebrew is not a developed regional dialect that evolved over centuries of human interaction. Rather, it is the root blueprint through which Hashem created reality itself. In Hebrew, the name of a thing constitutes its very essence. The letters serve as the foundational architecture of existence. The primary linguistic error of the ancient Near Eastern method is the belief that because Akkadian was an international language of the 2nd millennium BCE, it must serve as the ultimate arbiter for biblical terminology.
We must carefully compare the divine origin of Loshon HaKodesh, the pure and original tongue, with Akkadian, which represents nothing more than a shattered, paganized fragment post-Babel. Secular philology distorts divine intent by judging the pure light of the holy tongue through the distorted mirror of these shattered dialects. For instance, when scholars utilize Ugaritic texts or the Epic of Gilgamesh to define foundational Hebrew words, they are employing a derivative of a spiritual fall to analyze the purity of the divine word. To search for the meaning of a sacred mitzvah in a Babylonian merchant's ledger is a severe methodological misstep that strips the text of its inherent holiness.
This chronology clarifies the absolute primacy of the holy tongue. The timeline demonstrates that the Torah existed 2,000 years prior to creation. At creation, Loshon HaKodesh was the spoken reality. It was only at the event of the Tower of Babel that language fragmented into regional dialects. Finally, at Sinai, divine truth was meticulously restored. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer establishes that prior to Babel, the entire world spoke the holy tongue. Therefore, Akkadian is not a clarifier for Hebrew, it is a confuser, proving the chronological and ontological superiority of Loshon HaKodesh over all later derivatives.
Section 2. The polemic fallacy. Blueprint, not reaction.
We must now dismantle the academic fallacy that categorizes the Torah as a mere polemic or a reaction to ancient Babylonian myths. The Midrash Tehillim 90 states explicitly, the Torah pre-existed the world by 2,000 years. The academic theory suggesting that the Torah is a polemic against texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh contains a fundamental theological error. To suggest Hashem was merely fixing or responding to pagan ideas fundamentally subordinates divine will to human history. It implies that had the Babylonians not recorded their narratives, the Torah might not exist in its current form.
We must contrast the timeless, heavenly patterns of the Torah, which is the true blueprint, with the corrupted, idol-filled memories of the nations. Comparing biblical accounts to pagan myths severely devalues the divine message. If the Babylonians possess a flood narrative, it is precisely because their ancestors survived the historical flood and passed down a corrupted, paganized memory of that actual event. The laws of the Torah are the original heavenly patterns that the nations attempted and failed to mimic in their idolatry. The light originates from the Torah, casting shadows upon the ancient Near East, not the reverse.
Section 3. The Covenant. Marriage, not treaty.
We critically examine the clinical error of reducing the sacred Sinai covenant to a transient, ancient political contract. The secular university frequently views Sinai as a temporary suzerainty treaty, comparing Hashem to a Hittite king and Israel to a vassal state. However, the Torah defines this relationship strictly as kedushin, a sanctified, ontological marriage between the infinite and the finite, bound permanently by kedusha or holiness. A political treaty is merely a contract of convenience that can be voided or replaced. The Mishnah in Tractate Tanit, however, compares the giving of the Torah to a wedding day, representing an immutable change of being.
Furthermore, in Tractate Yoma 28b, the sages state unequivocally that Abraham kept the entire Torah before it was officially given at Sinai. Abraham was not following Nuzi adoption laws or Hittite legalities. Rather, he was tuned into a divine frequency that the pagan world had lost. When scholars filter the covenant through ancient Near Eastern legal mechanics, the concept of kedusha is entirely lost. The mitzvah are not a tribute paid to a suzerain. They constitute the wedding ring that permanently binds the finite to the infinite.
Section 4. Authority. Transmission over archaeology.
This brings us to a crucial epistemological contrast, evaluating the living oral tradition against secular archaeological discoveries. Modern scholarship frequently argues that a 1500 BCE clay tablet excavated from the dirt offers a purer context than the sages of the Mishnah, suggesting that archaeology supersedes the oral tradition. It is a category error of the highest order to suggest that a merchant's clay tablet, the dead letter excavated from the dirt, possesses more authority than the unbroken chain of the Mesorah, the living word carefully preserved and guarded by scholars across millennia.
Consider Abraham's departure from Ur-Kasdim. When Abraham left the very heart of the Akkadian world, he permanently abandoned the entire Akkadian pagan worldview, not merely a physical geographic location. He systematically rejected the very pagan framework that modern scholars now attempt to superimpose back onto the biblical text. True authority in Torah does not originate from excavated artifacts. It derives exclusively from this unbroken, living chain of precise transmission spanning back to antiquity.
This principle is codified in halacha as lo b'shamayim hi, the principle that the Torah was given to men to decide according to the strict rules of transmission. The sages of Israel possessed exclusive authority over the interpretation of divine law. Even if an archaeologist unearths a tablet that appears to contradict a halachic tradition, the halachic tradition forever supersedes any contradicting artifact. To claim otherwise is to assert that the surrounding pagan nations understood Hashem better than his own designated interpreters. We must consistently reject the dead letter of archaeology in favor of the living word of the Mesorah.
Section 5. The Korah Warning. Encroachment versus divinity.
Applying secular linguistics to biblical events creates severe theological distortions. This is clearly demonstrated when analyzing the rebellion of Korah. The Akkadian translation defines Korah's sin using the word karev as a mere temple protocol error. Contrast this with the traditional understanding of a severe rebellion against the divinity of the oral law. Using Akkadian dictionaries to define Korah's sin strips away its moral weight entirely. It reduces a direct, existential assault on divine authority to a mere ancient etiquette violation. Korah did not simply step over a physical boundary in the dirt, he challenged the very authority of the Mesorah. By utilizing the laws of the nations as a filter, the Torah is improperly reduced to a dry manual of ancient pastimes rather than a vibrant guide for the soul.
Conclusion: the throne of truth. The standard of truth is clear and immutable. First, the filter is the Mishnah, not an Akkadian dictionary. Second, the context is Sinai, not the palaces of Nineveh. Third, the power is halakha, not an archaeological survey. We glorify the King of the universe when we cease attempting to force his word to fit into the history books of other nations. The Torah is the standard by which all other cultures are judged. It is not the other way around. Let the nations look to the Torah for light. We do not look to their shadows, for the pure law of Hashem is perfect and restores the soul.
The question that remains for the serious academic student is this: will you view the divine word through the shadows of fallen nations, or let the unbroken chain of transmission guide your understanding? Join MishnahWalk.com today for